Hello and welcome to another episode of the Next Generation podcast. Today we have an amazing friend that I made recently and someone that I am just so excited to bring onto the podcast to have a nice, fun, casual conversation with you guys. Teto Medina Wallace is on with us this morning. I actually met him through my other podcasting efforts with Cattle USA. We had him on to talk about the U.S.-Mexico trade agreements and stuff like that that's kind of going on at the border with the cattle and all of that sort of stuff. So, Teto, can you please take it away? Just share a little about your life, who you are, what you do, all the things like that for our audience members.
Absolutely. I'm delighted to be your guest today. We had a wonderful, wonderful time on your last podcast. I know that we probably could have talked for hours, but we only had
Yes.
limited time. So we had a great time. Again, my name is Teto Medina Wallace, and I'm happy to be your guest today. I'm happy to connect with all your friends that you have on your podcast and everybody else that might join us at a later time. But anyways, I am the general manager here at Santa Teresa Livestock Auction. We are the only livestock auction that is at a port of entry. And we're at the largest port of entry for cattle into the United States market. Right here within a stone's throw from where I'm sitting right now is the largest cattle crossing. We cross about 600,000 head of cattle yearly here at this crossing. And the way we came together as formed our friendship was through your podcast. You were wanting to know a little bit more about what was going on with the screwworm, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. So just it's a hot topic in the news right now. But before we started, we really got to talking about how much our love for history united us, and we went off on several tangents that morning. So we can go off on a few more today. I'll tell you a little bit more about me. I am a resident of the United States. I'm a United States citizen, but I have deep roots in Mexico. My family's been cattle ranching in Mexico. Same property for the last 150 years. It's been a while. And my great-grandfather arrived there he came to the United States, landed in Ohio during the time that they were recruiting cattlemen out of Europe to come tend to the American ranches when the great expansion west was happening. And he just happened to get hired by an outfit out of New York City. And it was part of the family that now to this day owns Chase Manhattan Bank. And that's how we landed in Mexico. But that's where my heritage is from, and I love history, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about how that history unites the Mexican cattle industry with the United States cattle industry. Hope I didn't talk too much.
No, that's the whole point of us being here is we can talk as long as we want on this podcast. Teto, you're writing a book. And we talked a lot about that on our last one where we were just like having a nice, fun, casual conversation before we even started our very limited time that we had together to talk about screwworm and all of those things. And I will say, for all of you audience members, we can talk about that a little bit at the end. But if you want to learn more, I'll have the Cattle USA episode link down below. Today, Teto and I are going to focus a little bit more on just like history and a fun conversation, just like over things that we both love talking about. So first and foremost, I want to hear about your book. Tell the audience members a little bit about it. I already know a little bit about it, but you're writing a book. You're writing a book about history, stuff like that. Share a little bit more about that, will you?
Absolutely. When I landed here at Santa Teresa Livestock Auction, I wanted to find some common ground that united the Mexican cattle industry with the American cattle industry. And knowing that my family's been exporting into the United States market right from the arrival of my great-grandfather from Scotland into Mexico, that's kind of where my investigation started. I grew up on an hacienda, and it was one of the largest contiguous properties in all of Mexico at the time in the 1880s. I'm not going to say it was the most, but it was probably amongst the top three. I know that it was larger than the King Ranch by a lot of land, and we can talk about the numbers right now. But it was larger than the King Ranch, and I've read a few accounts through books that have been written about the property where I grew up, of that the Mexican Revolution started there. And this was the American manager, the nephew to Mr. Morgan out of Chase, Manhattan. He was writing letters back to the folks back east, telling them what was happening, how their ranching interest was being attacked by both the revolutionaries and the natives as well. The Native Americans, the Apaches, they were they were rough. I mean, they were hard to fight. In fact, we saw that in the American West here in Texas, New Mexico, and throughout, of course, throughout any Western lands. And anyways, what I found there was that we share so much heritage. And as the population grew out in the East, in the big cities, Philadelphia, New York, and all these big cities that were being formed, Boston, a desire to eat beef grew as well. That is one of the things that characterizes the United States. And as the desire to eat beef grew, the population went west and the cattle moved from south to north. Mexico had a much larger cattle population than back then, because the first cattle that were brought onto the American continent were brought through Mexico, through the port of Veracruz in 1521. And that was well over 100 years before Plymouth Rock. But by the time Plymouth Rock was settled, there was already cattle in what is today the United States. In Santa Fe, there were 5,000 head were herded from Santa Barbara, Chihuahua, to Santa Fe to found the mission of Santa Fe. And I thought that was really interesting. One of the most interesting parts for me is that was the cattle. Those cattle crossed about 22 miles from where I'm sitting right now. So I found that not only was there a lot of history that put us together, we are so similar just as cattle people. And then I found that the American cowboy, what makes us so iconic as a country, gives us our cultural heritage. Everywhere in the world that I've ever worn a hat, people want to take a picture of me. And I find that so amazing. And that's one of the things that unites us as well. The Mexican vaquero kind of became the American cowboy, as Texas became the United States, thanks to Stephen F. Austin.
Yeah, no, it's so cool to just like hear more about how the American cattle industry kind of started and the history behind that. I feel like so often as cattle producers, we know it, but we don't really know it, of like how we kind of got our start to the like thing that runs our industry now, and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit more about like the concept of we're more alike than we are different in this aspect of, from like the Mexican cattlemen to the American cattlemen? We are more alike than we are different in a lot of ways and stuff like that. And you have a really interesting take on it as well, just from like a history perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. Recently, we had an auctioneering contest here at Santa Teresa Livestock Auction, and we had auctioneers come from all the land and from Canada. In fact, the winner was from Canada, and we had one contestant from Mexico that knows how to auction in Spanish, in English, and in German, and he's really good. But anyways,
German?
in
That's
German.
cool.
Yeah, he's a Mennonite living in Mexico, and he's got a big auction business in Mexico. But he does it in all three languages, and he's so
Wow.
good. He's so talented. I definitely enjoy his friendship as well as everybody who made it out here. But one of the things that characterized this auction was how the American cattlemen and the American buyers that came, and people from the livestock industry, from the Livestock Marketing Association, were here, and they got to talking and sharing a few beers together. And Mexican and American cattlemen started talking, and they just they were surprised by how similar they were. The cattle that they breed, the same problems that we have. We have the exact same problems. Maybe we think of it in a different language, But in the end, the goal is the same. We got to turn our grass into a product that we can take to market and we can sell. As cattle people, we've chosen to sell cattle, which is my favorite meal, by the way. Is steak is my favorite meal, but there's a number of other ruminants that you could choose to market. And there was two things that surprised people. Number one, the quality of cattle that they were running, and mainly the cattle went north, and the cattle industry flourished and bloomed beyond what anybody's expectation could have been, because the cattle kingdom is in the United States, of course. We know that. And it's somewhere between Texas and Kansas and all the Great Plains in between. And one of the things was that I said, well, yeah, the cattle went north, but they flourished there like if they were meant to be there. And the genetics flowed south because the United States has created some of the best genetics that the earth knows today. We're not the only ones creating genetics, but I know that we are expanding rapidly on that subject. We're keeping data more than ever before, and that export of genetics is what binds us most today, because we are producing cattle for the American market. But back to your question. Well, the same problems. It's all about rainfall and climate and the types of diseases that cattle get. They're all the same. And when you get up on your truck and you're thinking about what you're going to do today, you can be thinking about it in Spanish or in English, but the goal at the end of the day is going to be the same. It's going to be to produce quality food for our industry.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Can we go back a few years and talk a little bit about kind of your upbringing in like Mexico and like your upbringing of your family's ranching operation? What's like kind of the same, a little bit different? I know Mexico has a very different landscape for running ranches than we do, say, here in the plains of Kansas or stuff like that as well. Just talk a little bit about maybe a little bit more about your background and stuff like that too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I did grow up on this cattle ranch. Today it's not in the middle of nowhere because we've got a highway running right through it, and with all the progress that's been made, all the automobiles that are available to everybody, well, now we've got automobiles running up and down our highway. But still, when I was growing up, I felt like I was growing up in the 1800s, but it just happened to be in the 1970s. And I will say one thing: when I turned 17, I said, I'm going to run away from this place as fast as I can. I'm going to get educated. I'm never going to come back because it's such hard work. And as I climbed the ladder, all I could think of is, how am I going to make myself back to the ranch? Because I had a wonderful childhood. I I could have been anywhere in the world. I could have been in Kansas, or I just happened to be in Chihuahua when I was growing up. Uh, we had no borders per se that taught us who we were. All our cattle influence came from the United States because that was our market. And my family, we spoke both English and Spanish at home. I learned to speak English at an early age because my mom taught me English, and that came from her father, that came from her grandfather, that was from Scotland. So we never forgot about our roots, the Scottish roots. Today we don't know much about them, but we're still proud to be come from a Scotsman, and we had such a wonderful time growing up. I think that that's one shared value that doesn't matter where you grow up on earth. If you grow up in nature, it is so beautiful. And I say that I always talk about the cattle business as a business of transformation. And number one, I say it's a business of transformation because everything you do at a cattle ranch involves transformation, transforming that feed or the forage on your ranch into something that you can sell. And then that something that you can sell is transformed into a wonderful steak that shows up on our dinner plates. And, all that transformation, it just is such a long process of transformation. But I will tell you one thing: all summer long, I got visitors that wanted to come spend the ranch time at the ranch. My cousins, their friends, everybody fought for a bed at the ranch to be able to spend time at the ranch. And they were worked really hard, just as hard as me. And they were eager to come, and I couldn't figure it out. I was like, why would they want to come work so hard when they could be at home playing Atari or in television or Nintendo, whatever it was at the different points in time? And that's another thing that I realized today. The land will transform who you are. Even today, you take troubled kids, troubled youth, you take them out on a ranch and you put them next to livestock, and the person that they are and who they become is incredible. The connection to land is such a beautiful thing, and I was so lucky. I think you were too, to be able to have that connection. Um, I think that it transformed me, who I am. I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. Yet today, I want my child to be able to have a piece of that. I yearn for that so much, and so much has changed, but yet the land is still there.
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of us can relate to that though, because I think like growing up on a ranching operation, you see day in and day out the hard work that it takes, the toll that it takes on your family, your parents, all of that stuff. Cause it's really hard because we're living it 24/7 all the time. And so you turn 18 and you're like, get me out. And I was the same way. I didn't even want to have like a degree in agriculture. I went to the nursing college and was in that for 4 years, like during COVID and all of that stuff. And then I was like later on realized that actually no, like I do love this. Like I love this life. It was just I needed to separate myself from it for a little bit. I think to really appreciate it in the way that I do, because now that I'm married and we're looking at our future in life and stuff like that, it's like, no, we want that same thing for our kids. Even though when I was 18, I was hightailing it out of the ranch. I was like, get me out, get me away. I want nothing to do with this. I even told my dad not to worry about putting me in the will for the ranch. I was like, give it to my brother. I don't want it. And then now I'm like, hey, dad, we need to rewrite that will. Actually, I do kind of want it now. So yeah, no, I think a lot of us can probably relate to that because it's hard work. We live it all the time, and it takes a toll on you as a kid. But at the same time, like I wouldn't trade that upbringing for anything.
Those are the shared values that I'm talking about, and those are the things that I think bring us together so much. I mean, we are a brotherhood. Once I saw people engaging together, Mexican cattle people and American cattle people, and the good part is that a lot of my base of customers know English or have been educated in the United States just because of our geography. Chihuahua is so far from the centered part of Mexico, from Mexico City. Mexico is a very centralist country, and so we're in far north, and a lot of us will come migrate north to come get our education. And that's an important point because due to the centralized nature of Mexico, that is the reason that Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, California, a piece of Kansas are now part of the United States because the centralized government didn't take care of the outer parts of the country back then in the 1830s. So in an attempt to get Texas populated, the Mexican leader in the 1830s invited American settlers to settle into what is now Texas. And then they wanted to rule them with an iron fist from the centralized part of Mexico. And those Texans who have always been so brave said, no, that's not going to happen. That is not happening on our territory. And they turned things around. They became a nation of their own. And then in the 1846 through 1848, the Mexican and American War happened. And instead of making it any easier for the Mexican government of that time, they lost more territory. But it really doesn't matter whose land it is. It's the land is of the people that work it, like you and I, who have lived on a ranch. And you are so far removed from politics when you're at the ranch. The only politics are going to be probably at sale time. The rules, have a driver's license to get on the truck to take them to the sale barn and etc. But other than that, we're just removed from politics. And I guess that's what makes life on a ranch so beautiful too.
Oh, I 1,000% agree. I know, like, growing up, like, it wasn't a conversation at the dinner table. It wasn't something we really worried about, or it was a concern or anything like that. Cause my dad's kind of philosophy for a long time was like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not affecting me. Like, it's not affecting my day to day life. Like, unless a policy or something like that, like, starts to affect my day to day life, like, I don't really care. It's like, I'm in the middle of Kansas, in the middle of nowhere, or we were on a ranch in Oklahoma for a while too. Like, we're in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't, like, it's not affecting me. It's not affecting my life. We're removed. And there's like beauty in that removal as well. You were kind of joking earlier that you were like, it felt like I was growing up in the 1800s, but it was the later 1900s that I was actually growing up because of how remote we were. We weren't quite that remote when I was growing up by any means, but like still you are removed from a lot of other things that are going on unless you are like going into the sale barn or stuff. And I think that that has definitely changed now for a lot of ranches and a lot of people, that they may still be remote, but it's not quite the way that it used to be by any means, as like we continue to just expand and develop as a population in the States. But it's still that aspect that even if like just outside of like politics and all of that stuff, when you go to a ranch, you feel removed from the busyness of life. Like it's a different kind of work. It's a different kind of busy. It's a rejuvenating busy, if that makes any sense at all.
Absolutely. And the people are so different. And, I like all kinds of people because when I'm asked what business I'm in, most people want me to say I'm in the cattle business, but I've always said I am in the people business, in the relationship building business. And I will tell you one thing about working in cattle. I worked in finance and I worked in marketing, and I was a salesman for all of Latin America for a number of years. I traveled a lot, and I climbed that corporate ladder. But I'll tell you one thing, ever since I came back to cattle, I knew that I was exactly where I needed to be. And the size of the paycheck didn't matter that much anymore because my life was so complete that I didn't have to think about wanting a nicer car or those things in life. And I'll tell you one thing, you can tell the difference. If you walk into any other business, it's going to be hard for anybody to say hello to you. Maybe somebody might, because there are polite, kind people out there. But in the cattle business, people still want to talk to you. They still want to know where you're from. Where are you ranching? What type of cattle do you have? There's so much to talk about. Small talk is big talk. And I love talking to cattle people. I love making friends with them. I notice that most cattlemen, even though they're so removed from the rest of society, they've never met a stranger.
1,000%. Like I can tell you, like, so honestly, my dad is that way. Like, you walk into a room and he has never met a stranger. Like, he is going to be talking to everyone about everything. And like, it doesn't matter if he's in like the downtown Denver airport. Like, he's going to be talking to someone. And he's also that guy that like walks around in his cowboy hat everywhere and is the one that, like, that's getting pictures taken of him. But he's like also the guy that's like, someone's taking a picture of him in an airport and he walks up to him and he's like, "You want a selfie?" And he'll like take a picture with them and stuff like that. Like,
Exactly.
he's like, I don't care. Like, I'm never gonna see these people again in my life. And like, it is a business of the people. Like, it is a business of just relationship making. I like how you said that, like, people are always like, they want me to call myself a cattleman, but I'm in the people business. Like, that's my job. Like, I'm here to just relate with people, relationship build, all of that stuff, because I think that's a big part of the cattle industry and just agriculture as a whole, is that we're still very rooted in that. And I'm so glad that we are. And I hope that that never goes away.
Absolutely. I knew that when I met you. Within 30 seconds, I go, boy, she's a people person. She's got a charismatic personality. She's so, her smile is contagious. And
Oh, thank you.
you're just so full of positive energy. I love talking to you. And I know you asked me about the book, and we always get caught up.
Yes, we get off on tangents all the
So
time.
I'll
Yes,
tell
go
you a
back to
little
the
bit
book.
about my book.
Yes.
Um, I'm no writer per se, but I love to read.
Mm-hmm.
And there comes a moment in time when you say, hey, I want to write something down too that I want to share with other people, because I think that the best things I've learned, other than lessons that have been handed down by my family for generations, I think that the best things I've learned ever came out of a book. And I love reading. I want my child to share in that experience. So I decided to uh, just start writing an outline. I I had read several books about the cattle industry, but I started with the American cattle industry before I read much about the Mexican cattle industry, because that's where I was trying to build a bridge with the Americans and the Mexicans, but mainly to get more acceptance of these cattle in the United States market through friendship, through shared values. And then I started with the trampoline herd, and that was such an eye opener. You know, little did I know that there was a connection between uh, uh, what is it? John Wayne's movies and Clint Eastwood. I'm sorry, and the droving of cattle from Texas to Kansas. And then I find out that that's what all those movies are basically about. And I'd seen them so many times and never caught on to that fact, you know. And then I read Cattle Kingdom, and The Last Cattleman and The Cattle King. And then I got caught up in the packing industry, and then I wanted to learn more about the packers, and I read a little bit about Chicago and how that uh, concentrated all the cattle business in Chicago in the between 1860s to the 1890s. And there was this gentleman. It was kind of a town of its own, packing town. It was called. That's what people from Chicago called it. But it was a town of its own, and it had kind of like its own law, and it was all built by immigrants, mainly by Eastern Europeans back then. And there's this guy, Upton Sinclair. He was an author, and he wrote the book The Jungle. And he wrote a book about the horrors of living in Packingtown. But I really enjoyed it because it took me back into a different era, different types of immigrants that were building a life. A lot of those immigrants probably today are enjoying the American dream fully, which is a beautiful story on its own, as am I. And I am very proud to be here and very proud to live this American dream. I love it here. I never will forget my heritage. I go back on a regular basis. I visit mom, but I love it here too. But anyways, I read about Upton Sinclair, and then I read about his connection to the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921. And through one connection, I went through another connection. Then I read how McDonald's revolutionized the beef industry. And out of McDonald's, we get the modern feed yard. And I'm like, what? And you start really connecting dots. And then I trace back the first pages of the trampoline herd. It did say that the first cattle ever came to this continent were through the port of Veracruz. It was a very accurate description. And then I read a little bit more about, the cattle industry in Mexico and how the hacienda system was a simple, like, it was just small kingdoms that the king of Spain put down in Mexico to be able to rule it like a cobweb, kind of like, everything centered at the middle, just like a cobweb is. And then they all connected through roads that drove cattle to markets. And, I said, boy, we are just so much more alike. There's so much to this. And I said, the Mexican rancher, all they know is that they cater to the American industry, for the feedlot industry, and for the stocker industry here in Texas. We're not a big part of the industry. We're anywhere between 3 and 5% of the industry as a whole, but it's been an integral part since the cattle industry started in the United States. And in Texas, we're a bigger part. We're between 15 to 20% at any given point of time. If we'd seen the cattle on feed report last week, we saw that 14% were down in Texas. And I said, well, that's the Mexican cattle right there. And so I said, I need to give this, hand this story down to the Mexican producer. I want to give him a sense of pride that what he's doing is helping an industry as a whole. And I want to give him a sense of pride that his identity has not been lost. He is still part of the Mexican vaquero, who is part of the American cowboy. Yes, we've changed. People evolve, and that evolution we see more clearly in the American market than anywhere else. I mean, look at how far we've brought genetics. Angus cattle, back when they were called Dotties and Humleys in Scotland. Um, the gentleman, I can't remember his name, but the gentleman who said, I'm going to start documenting these cattle, they were just black hillside cattle that were mostly polled. He said, I'm going to take care of those cattle because I don't want them to go extinct. And today we're afraid of others going extinct because the Angus breed has made such a strong impact in the American cattle industry. So we could see how Americans, we've taken this industry and we've really shaped it. But now we are sending genetics to Brazil, to Australia, to Argentina. I mean, we are the center of the beef industry. And it is so beautiful to tell the Mexican producer, hey, you're part of what made this industry happen, and give them a sense of pride. You know, I'm not giving them ownership because everybody's got a piece of this. If you have 10 cattle on your ranch, you're a piece of this.
Oh, so beautifully put.
And
Yes.
that's kind of how I started writing. And I'm interrupting you, but
No, go.
okay.
You're good.
So, anyways, my first subject is to give people, number one, my prologue. I tell people who I am. I come from a cattle ranch myself. I wanted to leave the ranch as soon as I could. I got an education, climbed the ladder, then was very lucky enough to find myself back into the industry in a place of privilege, because I think that being here on the border is a place of privilege. Being able to speak two languages, being able to communicate with my buyers, knowing exactly how they feel, because I've lived in the United States long enough to be acculturated. And then I came from Mexico and I grew up there and was part of that culture long enough to understand exactly how they think and how they feel. And being this bridge today, uh, to me, it's an honor, and it's an honor that I get paid for. Which is, I used to see people earn millions of dollars on TV playing football and golf, and I said, why can't I be one of those? And today I find myself in that position where I am one of those. Maybe I don't make millions, but I'm just as happy as they are. And
Oh, 1,000%.
so, anyways, my first chapter, and I tell them I am no expert. I'm writing this out of my heart. I came here. I'm one of those people that have always realized that I know very little, and I take books and I try to learn from them. And I've got a collection of about 50 books right here in front of me that are all related to the cattle industry that I read. And when I finished reading, I kept reading, buying more. And then noticed that I was just reading more of the same. It was the same story, just a different version of the same story. So I said, I'm going to start writing synopsis of each piece of it in my free time. And then I decided I'm going to give this as a gift to the Mexican people. And it's a little bit about the history of the business. It starts with the American business, and then I backtrack, and then I backtrack really far, because I always like to tell people, if you don't have a plan, planning to fail is failing to plan is planning to fail. So you got to have a plan, and to start with a plan, you got to know where you started. It's kind of like when you start a trip on a truck or on a car, and you say, okay, I'm leaving from El Paso to Los Angeles. Well, you got to know how far you've traveled to know where your midpoint is, and blah blah blah. Anyways, I traveled all the way back to Mesopotamia 10,000 years ago when cattle were first domesticated, and we're talking about aurochs. Aurochs were cattle that's where all the Bos Indicus and Bos Taurus cattle from today originate from. That's 10,000 years ago. And how important domesticating cattle is to our civilization. If city people only knew that these big, huge cities like New York, LA, Chicago, and all throughout the world were built on our ability to domesticate cattle, because what brought us to become sedentary and away from the nomadic lifestyle was agriculture. And cattle became a part of agriculture because the first domesticated cattle, they were the John Deeres of yesterday. They were the ones that were plowing our fields. And out of the growth of the cattle industry, the agriculture industry, came the cattle industry. Then they founded that they could make food out of the cattle. They could make them as the workhorses of the industry, of course, but they could make tools. They could make candles to keep lit at night, and so many beautiful products that contributed to our civilization came from cattle, but mainly the production of agriculture. And through producing plenty of food to eat, you gave others the ability to think. I mean, what would Tesla be doing if he didn't have the ability to think? If he had to be out hunting cattle, I mean, hunting prey, instead of having a plate to eat whenever he wanted, he wouldn't have been able to do all these wonderful inventions that have brought us to where we're at today. So I say in my book that, hey, this wonderful deal that we all get caught up in and we're addicted to, at least I am, more than I would want to be. But it's all because of the domestication of cattle, maybe not directly, but indirectly. But it tells you how far we've come. And in 9,900 years, we came really far. But in the last 100, it's amazing what we've done, especially as an industry.
1,000%. It's crazy to see how much we have developed as an industry over the last 100 years. I don't even like, sometimes it actually makes me scary to think about like what the next 100 years is going to look like. I'm like, what are my kids and grandkids going to experience? Like, what is the cattle industry going to look like then? Sometimes it's like exciting. And then sometimes I'm like, I don't want to think about it. That gives me anxiety. I actually don't want to think about it.
The part that gives me anxiety, I'll tell you, is that I don't want us to turn into chickens and hogs.
Exactly. Yeah, because we've seen it in those industries of just how quickly that changed, very quickly to the way that they currently run those businesses. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't want cattle to be that. I want cattle to still, the cattle industry to still be rooted in the amazing roots that we do have that you're kind of talking about right now.
It is our connection to the land. I mean, everywhere
Yeah.
in the world that cattle moved, humans moved with it. Everywhere that the humans went, they took their cattle to feed, to make tools, to make clothing. And cattle, dogs, and humans, boy, we are such a cohesive group. And it doesn't matter if you're Mexican, if you're American, if you're Chinese, if you're Argentinian, Brazilian, the connection with the earth is so important. And I think that when you get groups of people that come from different backgrounds together, probably like I'll mention, like when I was working in the industrial world, I went to a lot of these expos, the conventions, and people didn't connect as much at these conventions as you would see at a cattlemen's convention. You see at a cattlemen's convention, people from the United States are talking to people from China are talking to people from Argentina, but the way they blend is so much more. In fact, I always like to tell the story of the first cattle convention that I ever went to. It was from the Livestock Marketing Association. And I went there and I was a little shy and, not knowing what I was going to expect. And the first thing that I encountered was a meal. And the gentleman in front of me, we started talking. And by the time that we reached, we were waiting not for a meal, for a beer first. And by the time we reached the bartender, We were good enough friends that he bought me several rounds of beer, and I was like, gosh, this is wonderful. Where are you going to make a friend like this that's going to buy you a beer right away? And uh, today I see this gentleman at all our conventions, but by the end of the first day, I knew I was where I needed to be. I knew that I was where I wanted to be, and I knew that I was amongst friendly, like-minded people. And experiences like that are the ones that make me love this industry so much. Sure, we need money as a tool to take care of our families, but we also need that connection, like you and I have a friendship. Right away, we became friends and we started talking, and we found things and ways to bond our friendship versus trying to separate us. And that to me is so important.
Absolutely. It's the whole basis of like what our industry is built off of, and how blessed are we to have people in the industry that are like that. That a meal and a beer, like give us one of those two things and we're going to make lasting friendships. Like I think like the first like cattlemen's conventions that I went to and stuff like that, it was the same way. Like I show up and I'm an outgoing person, but like you take away all the people I know and you put me in a room of a bunch of people that I don't know, I'm going to make friends, but it's a lot easier if you're doing it over a meal, over a drink, over something like that. And I think that like all just goes back to our roots and everything that brought us to where we are right now, and just how blessed we are to be a part of such an amazing industry. And I feel so blessed to have a friendship with you because you're someone who's so passionate about the industry. And then you're also like, I'm so passionate about the history of our industry and giving ownership to people who may feel like they don't have a piece of the industry anymore, or it looks different, or things like that. And so with you writing your book and with just like your connections to both like the American cattlemen and the Mexican cattlemen and what that all looks like, of like, hey, this is where we are, this is where we've been, you have a piece in this. And it's an important role. Like the US cattle industry really relies on the Mexican cattle industry for its success, in a lot of ways. Is it a huge portion of it? No, but it's still a very, very important piece of it. I When we went through this screw worm deal and all of this stuff over the past few months, we've seen the impact of not being able to import cattle from Mexico and all of this stuff that has kind of been happening. So it's so cool to see someone so passionate about being like, hey, like this is your piece. Like you have a piece in the puzzle. Your story is important. Your history is important. Like, and I think that that goes to no matter what your heritage is. Like you said earlier, it doesn't matter if you have 100 cows or 1,000 cows or 10 cows, you still have a piece in this puzzle. Like you still have a piece within agriculture, and it's important that you're here, and we're glad that you are, and whatever facet that that kind of looks like.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it is amazing how just a few years, for example, one of the most impactful things that I reading about cattle history was the cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. I mean, those accounts, I read a cowboy's diary, and that was some of the most fascinating reading I've ever done on any subject. And, it's funny that if you take that part of history, it was only probably about 30 years, but it was only about 20 years that it was really red hot. Because later, what happened is that barbed wire got invented and people fenced everything up, and you couldn't just drive up and down cattle country freely just looking for the next watering hole to take your cattle. But it's amazing how those 20 years really gave an identity to this newly formed nation. I mean, this nation, we called it, back then, they called it the land of milk and honey. And it was called that because it had so much land and so much richness. And it was so vast. And people felt free. A lot of people felt free for the first time, and they still do today. But, it gave us who we are. That drover was a man that was built of steel. I mean, boy, to endure months of travel with no corrals. You're talking about people that are up 24 hours a day rounding up the cattle so that they don't stampede. And sometimes they did, and they'd have to look for them for days. But that kind of bravery and the type of climate that they encountered, and there was all sorts of ill during the trip, whether it was others trying to take your cattle from you, or the climate, or you couldn't cross the river because the river was overflowing at the Pecos or at a number of different spots across the way. Well, that those 20 years gave the United States its true identity. We are considered the Western world, and we are Western in our ways. And to me, it was just so neat to find not only my part of it in it, because the way I dress comes from there, but then I found out about the six shooters, of how the West was won, and how uh, the wells changed the cattle industry. Because before, you had to keep your cattle near a watering hole, and you had to make sure that there was enough water year round to keep the herd. If not, you'd lose the herd out of thirst. So the evolution of going to the windmills, and the Stetson, and just I built a timeline, and I'm going to share it with you. I don't have it with me right now. I didn't pull it up, but I built a little timeline of all the important things that happened to get us to where we are at. And refrigeration is such an important part of our lives today. Well, the race to refrigerate had a lot to do with wanting to send carcasses, beef carcasses, from Chicago to New York City, and trying to preserve the meat, because before that, yeah, they were sending them through rail, but they were still live, and they were still being butchered in the city. And after that, we were sending box beef, which is something that we are exporting to the whole world, that concept of box beef. But it was just so neat to feel how much of a part of it we still are today. I mean, the identity of a cowboy, we are as American as it gets. And when I'm sitting here at a sale barn, I always tell people, what is more American and more democratic than bringing your cattle to a sale barn? I mean, how much more American can we get? And I'm sitting right there, right here today, and it just makes me so proud.
1,000%. I seriously couldn't agree more. I just love the concept of like, hey, we got to look back and see how far we've come and where we started to be able to continue moving forward. Like, it's not saying let's dwell in the past or all of the what we could have done better, all of those things like that. But it's like, hey, like, this is where how far we've come. This is where we started. And now, like, let's look at where we're going as a cattle industry. And while still looking at that past and looking at that history and being like, how can we continue to preserve this? How can we continue to empower those who have those pieces of the puzzle, and kind of just continue to develop our industry as it continues to grow and expand? And it's crazy how much the cattle industry has impacted history as a whole over time. Like you said, refrigeration, like something that I can't fathom my life without my refrigerator and my freezer. Like, no way. Can't I I don't even want to think about it, honestly. It's like how much the cattle industry played a role in that. Of you wouldn't think that it would, but at the same time, it's like, hey, no, this was kind of like one of the major drivers of us wanting to figure out this whole refrigeration concept and all of the things like that, and just how much the cattle industry has had an impact on individual sectors within the history of the whole United States and whole of civilization in general.
It is amazing how much the cattle industry has brought us together. Number one, there would be no real estate if it wasn't for cattle, because agriculture wouldn't have taken off without the auroch the way it did. And we learned to write as a result, to keep tallies on the number of our production, and the days that it took to get the production. People started mapping the calendar. They took calendars more serious. They created the calendars based on the agricultural cycle. Then they found that there was a cycle. Then reading and writing went in the picture. Civility. I mean, we wouldn't have rules if we hadn't formed these alliances to live together. And I could honestly say that all of this is traces back to cattle, and we're still shaping the world. When people get together, the most important thing that I've ever done in my life is sit down for dinner with my family, and I still cherish that every day that I come home to my son. And the most beautiful meal that I could ever have is still a steak.
Amen. Amen. I couldn't agree more.
So how much more important can the cattle industry be,
Yeah,
And
1,000%.
that's
We
something
have
that I want to
such
share with everybody. It doesn't matter where you're from. If you're raising two head, you're part of it.
You are. You are. You have a place in this industry, and we're so happy that you're here. Like, genuinely, I think that the cattle industry sometimes gets such a bad rap for like its openness to newcomers or first generationers or all of these other things. And I want to say first and foremost that that is we have a few bad peas in the pod every once in a while, but the 90% of us, like, we're over here like, thank you for being here. Thank you for having a piece of this puzzle and supporting animal agriculture in whatever way that you do. And like, it doesn't matter if you have two head or 2,000, like, you have a piece in this, and we're glad that you're here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would like to add that I talk to a lot of old timers, because there's more old timers in the industry than young people, but there's young people entering, and they go, look at them. They don't even dress like we do. They don't wear cowboy hats. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with it. If cowboys are going to evolve into something different, if they're going to become more mathematically involved in the business, and that's going to carry us forward, so be it. Change is the only constant. And I say that in this podcast because there's probably going to be parents that have children that they don't like the way that they're readapting into the ranch and the customs that they bring from the city or from the university or whatever. It doesn't matter. The thing that matters is that they come back and that the industry survives. That's what matters.
1,000%. And if like anyone, if you're listening to this and take anything from this podcast, let it be that like, we can't be afraid as an industry to change and evolve, because if you look at the last 100 years, like we just talked about, we've changed and evolved at a rapid rate, like rapidly over the last 100, 200 years as a cattle industry here in the United States. And that wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't be where we are right now without all the change that happened without that, like throughout that whole history. And change is scary. Change is hard. It's hard to look at your kids sometimes and be like, okay, like, I got to trust that you're going to carry on this legacy. But like, that's the biggest thing. Like, you raised them right, I would hope. And like, you just got to trust that they are going to continue to carry on the legacy of the American cattlemen in their own way. And that's the beauty of the American cattlemen as well, is we are a melting pot of a lot of different histories and cultures and all of this stuff that have all come together to form the American cattlemen. And we wouldn't be that if all of our ancestors hadn't sat down at a table and decided that it's okay to merge and melt and change and do all of these things. And as adults now, we need to look at our children and be like, we want you to be here. Thank you for being here. And it's okay if you change. It's okay if you change the way that we do things. It's okay if you come back and you change the way that we do our bookkeeping. It's okay if you come back and change the way that we rotational graze or things like that. Like, and with that, like, allowing them to fail a little bit too. Like, we all have to fail in order to grow and in order to learn. And it's not easy to sit back and do that, but it's really important that we allow ourselves to be open to the idea of change. And I'm not saying that you have to let your university student come back and they listen to their professor and come back and change your entire operation. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying be open to it. Be open to having the discussion with them at the dinner table. And then maybe, you give them a minuscule 10% piece of the business and you're like, you know what? If you fail at this, it's okay if you fail with that 10%. I'm not going to give you the full 100 yet, but go learn, go experiment, go do your thing, and just like be open to that change and involvement.
who knows? The best, the next, this coming generation is going to teach us a lot, and they're going to present something so different. I mean, today's cattle are so different from yesterday's cattle, and I'm going to go back a little bit into history again, just because of what you just mentioned right now. But for example, when I read about the domestication of cattle, it happened in several different parts of the world at different intervals, but they weren't connected to each other. Um, it happened in northern Africa, and those people were mainly nomads, still with cattle, but there was a lesson to be learned from that. And then it happened in India, and there was a lesson to be learned from that. And then it happened in Mesopotamia, and of course, the biggest lesson was learned there. And then the Europeans had their own little take, and I think that we've learned a little bit from each. Europeans were the first ones to really do uh, dual purpose cattle and single purpose cattle. Single purpose was mainly for beef, which is our industry mainly in the United States. We still have a dairy industry, of course, but mainly either your dairy or your beef industry. You're not really both like we were in the 100 years ago. We had cattle that intersected in both beef and dairy, and they were dual purpose. So, anyways, Europe taught us that part. They taught us a little bit more about the genetics and the modern way that we look at genetics. And then the Indian people, the Hindus, they taught us a little bit more about the looking at animals in a more respectful manner. They taught us animal husbandry. They taught us a lot about that because they've been practicing it for 8,500 years. And I'm not saying cattle people don't practice that, because the cattle people that I know are the people that treat animals the best of anybody that I've ever met. Cattle people treat animals with respect. But we learned something from the Indian people, and then we learned something from the nomad tribes of rotational grazing and how to take care of the deserts. And of course, we learned something from the first people that domesticated in Mesopotamia. And what this brings me to is, if we learn from all of those, what are we going to learn from this next generation? They've got a lot to teach us. I know that they're going to be big contributors, and I know that they're not going to let this beautiful industry die, because even if they leave the ranch running like you and I did, they're going to come back running. And they're going to be so happy that their kids are going to get a piece of that as well. Just like you and I, my dream is for my son to spend more time at the ranch. The few moments that he spends outside with horses, because we live in the city. I mean, I wish that I still just lived at the ranch, but I don't. But the few moments that I see him connect with the land, he comes home way more happy, and there's just something different about him, and that's the transformation of land and the connection with the animals.
1,000%. I seriously couldn't agree more that this next generation is going to be doing some really awesome things. They really are. They already are, and it's just don't give up on them. Don't be too afraid of the things that your kids are going to come back and say, or contribute, or all of these things. Even if like they did go running away from the ranch like Tato and I did, they will come running back. I can promise you it might not be in the next 5 or 10 years, but eventually they'll look at that and be like, okay, I'm coming and I'm running. I want a piece of that. I miss it. I want my kids to be a part of it, stuff like that, because it really is a life that we are so blessed to live. Tato, I have had such an amazing conversation with you today. This was so fun. I just looked down and I was like, "Oh my gosh, we're already at an hour. How did that
Wow.
happen?"
I'm going to
we
leave one last comment
Yes,
with you.
please do.
Um, Back at the turn of the century, the person that was involved with the U.S. Patent Office, where all inventions are turned in, he said that everything that was ever going to be invented had already been invented. There was no need for any more patent office. And I leave that as the last comment, because I trust that this new generation is going to leap us forward into where we're going to evolve and preserve this lifestyle. And thank you so much for this time. I can't believe an hour went by. I know that I had no structure when I talked, but I talked from my heart.
Yes, and that's I love it. This conversation was just so filling for my heart and my soul, and it was just fun. I hope that all of our listeners were able to just like come and hang out and have a good time listening to Tato and I talk, and just all of the different roundabout ways that we talked about a bunch of different topics. But hey, that's the whole point of our conversations and the way that we like to have them here. So, Tato, thank you so much for your time today. I had a blast, and it's such a blessing to have you as a friend.
Amen.
To all of our listeners out there, please make sure you like, subscribe, rate, review, all the things. And we will see you all next week on another episode of the Next Generation podcast. We'll see
God
y'all
bless
later.
the cattle industry. God bless the USA, and God bless everybody on this earth.
Thank you, Tato.